When I received a message from a stranger on Snapchat, I was surprised. This was no ordinary message with a question or a joke. Instead, I got only one photo. The picture was of my own house, taken from the street. I trashed the message and decided it was just a joke or an attempt to intimidate me. But after a few days, everything happened again. Another photo, another shot of my house. And this time it was taken from my front gallery, when I didn't even know anyone could be there. My first instinct was to check all the locks and windows, but nothing was broken. The feeling of unease remained, even if nothing was discovered. I decided that it was better to be on my guard and check this issue myself. The night after receiving the new message was particularly disturbing. I couldn't sleep, but eventually tiredness got the better of me and I drifted off to sleep. I woke up when I heard a knock on the door. It was late at night and I was immediately struck by the light. He looked out the window but did not see anyone. The feeling that someone was watching me remained. Found all the doors in place, but my nerves were on edge. I checked Snapchat again and saw a new message. This time it was a video of me sleeping taken from my own security camera. Anxiety reached its peak. I decided to find out who was behind these messages. I contacted Snapchat support, but they couldn't do anything helpful. I also tried to find some information about this account, but it simply did not exist in the system. The next day, I received an invitation to a small party from an old friend who hadn't called in a while. I decided it might be a good idea to relax and distract myself. When I arrived, everything was normal until I noticed one thing. My friend was clearly stuttering when I mentioned my Snapchat problems. At the party, I received another message. This time it was a voice recording in which someone said quietly but clearly, "I know you're there." I shuddered with fear and tried to call my friend, but he did not answer. I walked home, nervous that someone was following me. When I got home, I found all my doors and windows open, even though I was sure I had locked them. My phone was on the floor and Snapchat was open. I tried to check the messages again, but the account that sent me those scary messages has disappeared. I didn't know what to think. Was it a joke or a real threat? The night passed uneventfully, but my heart was still beating faster with fear. In the morning, I noticed that there were strange marks on the floor in front of my bed. They looked like marks left by a heavy suitcase or heavy object. I was sure I hadn't noticed anything when I got home. While inspecting the house, I found something strange in my garage. There was a package that did not belong to me. It contained an old computer and a number of documents, but no explanatory note. All these documents contained my personal information and addresses. The fear grew when I realized that someone could have entered my home and left these items without my knowledge. I decided to install new surveillance cameras around the house, but even that didn't give me a sense of peace. One night, I woke up to my new surveillance cameras acting like crazy. They recorded movement in the rooms where I was alone. I looked at the footage and saw something horrifying. The camera showed strange shadows moving around the rooms as if something or someone was trying to get to me. The next night I hardly slept, constantly listening for any sounds in the house. However, when sleep did take its toll, I woke up again from a nightmare. In a dream, I saw a stranger standing by my bed, silently looking at me. His face was hidden by the shadow, but I could feel his cold gaze. I woke up in a cold sweat. My heart was pounding. But it was not just a dream. When I got up to get a drink of water, I noticed that my bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I had closed it before going to bed. This feeling that something real from my dream had penetrated into reality filled me with a new wave of terror. I decided to contact the police. They sent a patrol to check, but as usual, they found nothing suspicious. This only increased my paranoia, making me think that no one could help. That same night, I installed an additional alarm and added motion sensors around my house. All was quiet until around 3 a.m. when I heard an alarm siren pierce the silence of the night. I rushed to the control panel, but all the sensors showed a normal state. The siren died down on its own, but the anxiety did not go away. I checked the cameras again, but this time they just weren't working. All the records are gone, as if they had been erased. Only one file remained, very short and with a terrible content. Only the numbers flashed on the screen, 1 o'clock, and then the image abruptly cut off. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, I was greeted with another Snapchat message. This time it was a series of photos. The first one showed someone in a mask standing on the doorstep of my house. The next photo showed the same place, but without this figure, only shadows on the walls that clearly indicated the presence of another person. But the most terrifying was the third photo. It was my own face, taken while sleeping. I remember this place. It was my bed in my own bedroom, taken from the corner of the room where there was no camera. The thought made me sick. Someone was in my house filming me while I slept. I didn't know who to turn to. The police couldn't help, and my friends started looking at me like I was paranoid. I felt that my life was turning into a nightmare from which I could not wake up. That night, I sat in the dark, drowning my fear with alcohol. The feeling of constant observation did not leave me. Every sound seemed to me suspicious, every movement of the shadow a threat. And when my phone vibrated again, I could barely muster up the strength to see what had come. It was a video. I saw myself on the screen sitting on the couch in exactly the same position I was in now. The camera was shooting me from the same corner of the room that I couldn't see. The video lasted for a few seconds before the image slowly faded away, leaving only a black screen. The next day, I decided to go to my neighbor, Mr. Harper. He was an older man who was always friendly and often told me he saw all the action around our block. I thought he might have noticed something. When I knocked on his door, no one answered. I stood there for a few minutes before opening the door, which was unlocked. Mr. Harper is gone. His house was in perfect condition, but he was nowhere to be found. Only one thing that did not belong to him lay on the kitchen table: a small black flash drive. I took it home with me, feeling that it was the key to the solution. But something prevented me from immediately checking its contents. When I finally dared to connect the flash drive to my computer, my hands were shaking. There was only one file on the flash drive: a video. I hit play and the screen lit up with a first-person shot. It was a night recording, clearly done in my house. The camera moved slowly through the rooms, stopping at various details: my things, my bed, my kitchen. But the worst thing was at the end of the video. The camera slowly zoomed in on the basement door, which I always kept locked. The video cut off just as the door began to open, leaving me with the feeling that someone or something was in my basement. And this someone knows everything about me very well. After watching the video, I sat still, trying to collect my thoughts. There were questions in my head. Who filmed it? How did it get to my house? And what exactly is in the basement? I never went down there because I thought it was just an abandoned warehouse for old things. But now, knowing that someone could have gotten in there, I felt I had to check. I took a flashlight and a knife with me, feeling really paranoid, and went to the basement door. They were locked as usual. I unlocked them and carefully opened the door, trying not to make any noise. The stairs led down into the darkness. Every step creaked under my feet, and this increased the feeling of anxiety. When I finally got to the end, I turned on the flashlight and flashed it around the room. At first glance, it was an ordinary basement with old furniture and boxes. But as I got closer to one of the walls, I noticed something unusual. It was a small door built into the wall. It was barely visible, but it had the same lock I saw in the video. Feeling on edge, I decided to open it. The lock opened easily, as if it hadn't been used in decades. I slowly opened the door, and a small room hidden behind the wall opened before me. The flashlight revealed only a few details, but they were eerie enough. An old, dusty table with a pile of papers on it, and a few objects that were clearly not from this time. But the worst thing was on the wall. There were several photographs hanging there. There were different people on them, all of whom I did not know. However, the last photo showed my face. It was a picture taken recently, just a few days ago. This again caused a wave of horror. Someone has been watching me for a long time, and now this someone has entered my life so deeply that he could control it completely. I rushed back to my room, leaving the basement open. There were no clear thoughts in my head, only panicked thoughts about how to get out of this situation. I tried to call the police, but the line was busy. All attempts to contact someone were unsuccessful. The phone simply did not answer. Desperate, I locked myself in my bedroom, hoping that if I just waited out the night, everything would fall into place. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't happen. Something terrible had already begun to gather momentum, and I became a part of it. After falling asleep for only a few hours, I woke up to a knock on the door. It was an ordinary morning, but everything seemed unnatural. When I opened the door, the same neighbor, Mr. Harper, was standing in front of me. I was shocked. He disappeared, and now he is standing in front of me as if nothing happened. His gaze was unusual, dead, without any emotion. He silently handed me the envelope and, without a word, turned and walked away. When I opened the envelope, there was only one sheet inside that said, "You're next." These words drove me into even greater fear. I became suspicious of everyone around me, trying to figure out who was behind it. But the answer was closer than I thought. There was no marking on the envelope except my address. I felt like I was being followed, but I couldn't figure out who was doing it or why. My life became unrecognizable. Every day turned into a constant struggle with an invisible enemy. When I opened Snapchat, I was greeted with a new message. This time it was a video of me going through old photos in the basement. The video was taken very recently, and I realized that the camera must have been in the room when I was there. This meant only one thing. Whoever was following me was in the house at the time. With every minute, the situation became more and more terrible. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew that if I didn't solve the problem now, the next move would be the last. I stayed at home all day, afraid to go outside. Every sound sounded threatening, and I kept turning around trying to see something or someone who might be near me. In the evening, I decided to see if there were any new messages on Snapchat. The feeling that I was not alone came over me again. When I opened the app, there was a new message. This time it wasn't a video, but just a text. "You're taking a long time. Stay home or it'll get worse." These words stuck in my head. I was on the verge of succumbing to fear and just sitting in the house, but something inside me decided to act. I couldn't bear this nightmare anymore. I gathered the necessary things and decided to leave the city. But when I went downstairs to get into the car, I saw that all the tires were flat. Did it happen just when I decided to act? It was as if someone knew my every move. My heart was pounding as I walked back up to the apartment. I felt like I was trapped. All the exits were blocked, and I could only wait for the next step from the unknown enemy. I sat back in my bedroom, trying not to panic. But then there was another knock on the door. This time it was the postman who brought me the envelope. It looked the same as the previous one, but when I opened it, there was only one word written on the piece of paper. "You can't escape by running away." It was like a warning or a hint that I couldn't change anything. An unknown enemy controlled everything. The next morning, when I tried to escape again, I saw an unknown car parked on the street in front of my house. It was parked in such a way that it blocked the exit. My fear reached its peak. I didn't know what to do next. It felt as if all possible avenues of escape had been blocked. Desperate, I opened Snapchat again, hoping for some clue or answer. A new message appeared on the screen. This time it was a photo. It was done in my driveway. It showed me when I left the apartment earlier. The photo was taken from behind, but when I looked closer, I saw that it was taken in a mirror, and in it I saw my own reflection. My heart almost stopped when I realized what that meant. Someone was standing behind me as I was about to leave the apartment. He could be hiding somewhere nearby and I wouldn't even notice it. I decided to act decisively. I gathered all my strength and left the apartment. This time I wasn't going to run or hide. I decided to meet this threat face to face. Going down the stairs, I saw the car still parked in front of the house. My fear was mixed with adrenaline. When I went outside, I saw a man getting out of the car. He looked normal, but his gaze was empty and cold. He approached me without saying a word. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "The one who knows all your secrets," he replied, pulling out his phone and showing me another video. This was filmed at my house while I was in the basement. In the video, I was looking for answers, and the same man was standing behind me. He was there all this time. I realized that this is the end. I took one last step back and tried to fight back, but the man was faster. He grabbed my arm and knocked me to the ground. My heart was beating so fast that I could feel the air in my chest running out. "It's all your own fault," he said as I tried to break free. He disappeared as quickly as he appeared, but I knew he left more than just fear. He left a mark that will haunt me for the rest of my life. When I came to, the man was gone. I returned to my apartment feeling that something had changed forever. But the worst was waiting for me at home. My phone was on the table and the Snapchat icon was glowing again. This time it was the last message. you lost. I opened it and saw that all my contacts, all photos, all data were gone. Everyone who knew me stopped answering my messages and calls. I was erased from their lives as if I had never existed. After that night, I became a shadow of myself. My world narrowed to loneliness and fear. Every time I left the house, I felt like I was being followed. I couldn't find peace anywhere. Everyone who was once close to me now seemed like a stranger to me. Life became an endless struggle with an invisible enemy that always remained one step ahead. And just when I thought it was all over, a new Snapchat message would always bring me back to the horror that I could never escape. Now, as I write these lines, I know that there is not much time left. I don't know who this man is and why he chose me, but I feel his presence in every corner of my life. And if you're reading this, know that I'm not the last. He will continue his game, and maybe next time it will be you. Don't open strangers' Snapchat messages. This may be your last step. It's been a few weeks since I last received a message on Snapchat. My life turned into a complete nightmare, and I decided that the only way out was to start over in a new place where no one knew me. I changed my phone number, deleted all accounts in social networks, moved to another city. It seemed that everything had finally stabilized. I rented a small house on the outskirts, away from the hustle and bustle. The new neighbors seemed friendly, and I gradually began to return to normal life. No strange messages, no traces of that mysterious man. But one morning, when I went into the kitchen to make coffee, I saw something strange. There was a new phone on the table. I didn't remember buying it, and I certainly didn't bring it here. The screen flashed with a message. "Did you think you could escape?" My heart sank again with fear. Whoever this man was, he found me even here. I did not wait for the development of events and threw the phone into the trash can. But when I went outside to get some fresh air, I saw a car parked near my house. It was the same car that blocked me back then in the city. Frightened, I decided to return to the house. But when I opened the door, the phone I had just thrown away was back on the table. This time he called. Trembling, I picked up the phone. "Don't think you can escape your fate," a quiet, cold voice rang through the receiver. I realized that I couldn't just hide. He will follow me wherever I go. My only hope was to stop him before it was too late. I decided that I needed to collect all possible information about this man. Maybe he left some marks that I hadn't noticed before. I remembered that the only way to find out more was to go back to Snapchat. After finding my old phone, I logged into my account, and there, among the old messages, was a new one that I hadn't seen before. This was a video recorded in my new kitchen. The camera slowly moved around the room until it stopped on me as I slept. A feeling of cold dread came over me as I realized that someone had been in my house at night when I was unsuspecting. "You can't hide from the truth," the text appeared on the screen after the video. I decided that it was impossible to wait any longer. This man knew too much about me, and I couldn't let him continue to play these games. I decided to act. Based on the clues from the video, I began to look for his tracks in the city. It was a game of survival, and I had to use all my strength to find him first. I started asking the neighbors questions, but everyone denied any suspicious activity. He seemed invisible to everyone but me. However, one day I noticed that man on the street. He was standing on the other side of the road and was looking straight at me. I decided to act. I followed him, keeping my distance, but he didn't try to run. He seemed to want me to follow him. I followed him to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. He went inside, and I decided to follow him. The place looked as if no one had lived in it for years, but each step forward filled me with more and more anxiety. I got to the door that led to the basement when suddenly I heard his voice behind me. "You think you found me? But I found you." I turned sharply, but no one was standing next to me. Only the silence and darkness of the basement where he disappeared. There was only one thing left for me: to go down and meet him face to face. I went down the old creaky stairs to the basement. The darkness engulfed me, and the only thing guiding me was the faint light from my phone. With trembling hands, I tried to turn on the flashlight, but the battery died quickly, leaving me alone with this darkness. I began to move forward, peering into the darkness, trying to make out at least some outlines. Somewhere ahead, a faint sound was heard. It could have been a step or a whisper. I held my breath, trying to catch any more sound, but the basement was once again eerily silent. Here I noticed tracks on the floor. They led further into the basement. I had no choice but to follow them. Each step was painfully slow, and I felt like my heart would explode from the strain. At last, I came to an old door half open. Something like breathing could be heard behind them. I opened the door sharply and saw a small room with concrete walls, but it was empty. Only an old camera was lying in the corner, aimed directly at me. I went to the camera and saw that it was working. The screen displayed a vivid image of my face, pale with fear. Suddenly, the camera started playing the video taken just a few seconds ago when I entered the room. I saw myself on the other side of the door, as if someone was watching me. But what kind of video was that? I couldn't find any logical explanation. The room was empty, but at the same time, the camera filmed me as if someone was nearby. I decided to watch the recording further. My face appeared on the screen, looking straight into the camera. But then something happened. Behind me, out of the darkness, a silhouette appeared. It was blurry, but I could clearly see it moving towards me as I stood in the same room. My breath caught and I turned sharply. There was no one behind me. I was alone in this gloomy room, but the video showed something completely different. It couldn't be a joke. It couldn't be a coincidence. It became clear to me that I needed to run away from here immediately. I ran out of the basement as fast as I could, leaving my camera behind. But when I was outside, I found that I could not find a way out of this darkness. The streets that seemed familiar before turned into a confusing maze. Every turn led me back to the same house where I started. I realized that this man wasn't just stalking me, he was playing with me, forcing me to relive the same nightmare over and over again. Then I noticed him. He was standing on the other side of the road, in the shadows, and was looking straight at me. His face was hidden by his hood, but I could feel his gaze penetrating me. He took a step forward, and I, without waiting a second, ran. I panicked as I heard him following me, footsteps getting closer. It was a survival game, and I didn't know if I would be able to get out of this horror. My breath was ragged, my legs were shaking from exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I knew if I stopped, it would be the end. But no matter where I ran, he was always somewhere nearby, in the shadows, watching my every move. I got to the park, where the trees created a veritable maze of branches and shadows. I tried to find a way out, but this park seemed to have no end. I heard footsteps approaching, but I couldn't make out where they were coming from. Suddenly, I saw him right in front of me. He was standing on the path that led to the exit of the park. I had no choice but to go to him. He didn't move, just looked at me. His face was still hidden, but I could feel his gaze. As I got closer, he took off his hood and I saw his face for the first time. It was me. My doppelganger stood before me. His face was an exact reflection of mine, but with one difference. His eyes were cold, merciless. I felt like I was looking at my own evil, the dark side that had been haunting me all this time. "You can't run away from yourself," he said softly, his voice the same as mine. I froze in place, unable to move. It was a trap he had set up, and I got myself into it. I realized that all this time I was trying to escape from a part of me that I couldn't accept. My doppelganger stepped forward and held out his hand as if inviting me to join him, but I felt that it would be the end if I accepted this invitation. I took a step back, trying to escape, but his hand was already touching me. The darkness began to consume me from within, and I felt myself losing control. The darkness that engulfed me from within was so thick that I could feel it. My doppelganger was pulling me to him, and every touch of his hand felt like frost penetrating the very heart. I felt myself losing control of my body, as if my consciousness was disappearing into this horrible reflection. But I couldn't just give up. I mustered all the strength I had left and broke free from his grasp. I managed to push him away, but each movement was painful, like I was tearing myself in half. My doppelganger fell to the ground, but quickly got back up, his face twisted into a sinister grin. "You can't escape," he said again, but now his voice echoed in my head, mixing with my own thoughts. I knew he was right. He was a part of me, a dark side that I had ignored for so long, but I couldn't let him capture me completely. I could not let the darkness win. I took a step back, trying to buy some time, but my double did not wait. He rushed at me with incredible force, and I barely managed to dodge. We found ourselves in a brutal fight, fighting not only for control of my body, but also for my soul. Every blow I took was returned with pain in my own body, as if I was hitting myself. But I understood that I could not retreat. This was my last chance to get rid of this nightmare. I focused on what was really important: my identity, who I was before this horror began. I reminded myself of my goals, the people I love, and what makes me who I am. These thoughts gave me strength, and with each blow my double weakened. His face began to change, to blur, as if he had lost his shape. But he was still fighting, trying to keep me trapped. I realized that simple blows will not help. It was not a physical confrontation, but a struggle for control over my consciousness. And I had to do something radical to stop this horror once and for all. I focused on the image of my double, on his cold eyes and ruthless smile. Then I began to imagine his face disappearing, dissolving into the darkness, leaving me alone. I gave up fear, doubt, everything that supported him. My doppelganger began to scream, his body contorting as if he was being consumed by the same darkness that surrounded us. I could feel him trying to hold back, but my will was stronger. Eventually, he melted away, leaving me alone in the dark. I stood there panting but alive. I won, but I knew that this victory cost me a lot. The darkness began to recede, and I finally saw a faint light on the horizon. It was the morning light that filtered through the trees of the park. I took a few steps forward, barely holding back the trembling in my legs. The light was like a rescue, but I knew that the remnants of fear would stay with me for a long time. I found myself on the streets of the city again. It was empty and quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I could not forget the struggle I experienced. I felt that even though I had won that battle, a part of me remained in that basement, in the darkness that never completely disappeared. I never opened that app again. I couldn't even think about him without feeling a cold sweat running down my skin. But the memories of that night haunted me every day, reminding me that there is a darkness inside each of us that cannot be escaped. Several months have passed since that day. I went back to my normal life, trying to forget everything that happened. But every night when I closed my eyes, I saw him. My double, the one I tried to destroy, kept appearing in my dreams. He didn't speak. He didn't do anything. Just stood there in the dark looking at me, and I knew it wasn't just a dream. He was a part of me, and I couldn't get rid of him. Sometimes I found myself thinking that I was starting to see the same signs of the darkness that I had defeated in my everyday life. It's as if my shadow has become darker, as if I see more than just my reflection in the mirror. I was afraid that one day he would return and this struggle would begin again. But for now, I live with this fear, trying not to let it take over me again. I tried to return to a normal life, but the shadow of my past continued to haunt me. Every time I met my gaze in the mirror, I saw him, the one I was trying to destroy. And while he no longer tried to take me physically, his presence was constant. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to weaken again. I tried to avoid being alone, to stay away from mirrors, dark alleys, and that horrible app, but I still felt him around. Friends and colleagues noticed that something was wrong with me, but I couldn't tell them the truth. They simply wouldn't believe me. My fear became my secret, a burden I carried inside me. The nights became even more sleepless. I often stayed up until dawn, afraid to fall asleep and meet him again in a dream. But the dream still came, and every time it was there, silent and still, watching me from the darkness. One day, as I was returning home after a hard day's work, I noticed something strange. There was something wrong with the mirror in the hallway. I got closer to get a better look and felt my heart stop. The reflection in the mirror did not repeat my movements. My doppelganger was standing right in front of me, but this time he wasn't just an image. His eyes were burning with the darkness I was so afraid of. He held out his hand to me through the mirror, and I felt a coldness envelop the hand he touched. I was paralyzed with fear. All my attempts to break out of his grip proved futile. He began to pull me towards him, back into the darkness where we first met. I felt myself being swallowed up, my powers melting away, the light leaving me, and then I realized that this is not just a reflection. It was a part of me that I tried to hide, to forget, but it was always there, waiting for its moment. In that moment when the darkness engulfed me, I realized that I had to make a choice. I could give up and let this dark side of me take over, or I could stand up to it, even if it meant dying in the fight. I mustered all my will and, despite the fear that gripped me, began to resist. I remembered all the moments in my life that made me who I am. Love, friendship, dreams. These memories gave me strength, and I could feel the darkness fading. My doppelganger began to scream, but his voice was distant, as if he was receding into nothingness. I made one last effort, yanked my hand out of his grasp, and stepped back. With a sudden force, I broke the mirror. The fragments flew in different directions, and with them the shadow of my doppelganger scattered. The darkness melted away, and I was back in the real world. The mirror no longer reflected my fear. It was just a shard of glass, safe and powerless. That was the end. I had won the battle, but I knew that my doppelganger would always be somewhere in my subconscious, ready to return if I weakened my will. But now, I was ready. I knew that my strength was not in avoiding the darkness, but in being able to face it. And although the fear remained with me, I was no longer afraid of him. I knew he was a part of me, but I also knew I was stronger, and I decided to live on, not letting the shadow of the past control my future.